This is a story about a woman who thought she'd scored. She'd gotten it all, and then bam, it all falls apart. And in falling apart, she discovers an ambition, a need to speak, and a voice that she just frankly didn't know was there. My name is Laszlo, and I'm here to talk about the graphic design from the marvelous Mrs Maisel. Hi guys, welcome back to our channel, the number one place for people who love design, art and all things creative. You are watching Dante and Balak's channel, and today, as I said, we are going to deep dive into old school 50s inspired graphic design by analyzing, breaking down and tearing apart some of the greatest graphic elements from the TV series The Marvelous Mrs Maisel. If you are unfamiliar, Mrs Maisel is an Amazon-produced, Emmy-winning TV series about an upper-middle-class Jewish housewife who, in the late 1950s, after a series of unfortunate events, discovers that she has the talent for stand-up comedy. And so us, the audience, gets to follow her and her extended family around as she is getting hot and cold for trying to make it in this business, in a time period which is still very much of a man's world. Now, if you are familiar and you've been looking for some marvelous content while we all sit here and wait for the next season, well, look no further. Let's have a closer look and find out how the graphic design work elevates the material of the marvelous Mrs Maisel. Jumping straight in. Let's start at the beginning. The marvelous Mrs Maisel logo type. Elegant, tall, crazy, and for the most part unapologetically pink. Exactly like our main character, Miriam Maisel in the show. What you see here is basically a font, a free font, mind you, which has been designed by a gentleman called Stuart Sandler. Stuart is a well-known typographer who, during his career, has created insane amounts of vintage, retro Americana-inspired fonts and types, whole font libraries. And this one here, this is one of his most famous creations. This font is his Mona Lisa. You see, Sandler launched his own retro font library website back in 1996, which he called Fontdinerdotcom. Now this font here was the crown jewel of this website. And so, just to make life a little bit easier for himself, and for better search results I suppose, he named this font, his main font, quite simply Fontdinerdotcom. Now there is a great article on Outliner's website written by Zoe Beery, who acknowledges that Fontdiner.com does a good job evoking that 50s and 60s American nostalgia with all its burger and a milkshake loving classic dinner signage vibe. Especially if you remember that back in 1996 we are still in Web 1.0 times, when most websites were using fonts which were, well, hella boring. Most fonts back in those days just lacked, you know, character. The Outlands journalist is not a fan though. In her article she states that this type of font evokes the 50s as you'd like to remember them, not as they really were. Fair enough comment. But I believe there is more to this story. Looking at this logo type, I feel like we can't just pass by without mentioning the obvious atomic era design references in it. What? Atomic style? Glad you asked. The atomic age in design refers to that roughly 20-year-long period between the 1940s and the 1960s, when Western society and maybe the whole world started developing a very different attitude towards the sciences and technology than ever before. Understandably, since quite a lot has happened in those 20 years, which made ordinary people like you and me looking at science and technology with a sense of wonder, a sense of excitement, but also with a sense of fear. News about breakthroughs in the atomic sciences, utilizing nuclear energy, a space race between the East and the West, just to mention a few key points, just kept flooding in non-stop from these little curious boxes called televisions. Now the artists and designers of the time took all this beautifully confusing, mixed bag of feelings, they packaged it all up and they translated it into a look. A style which has made its mark on anything and everything from fashion to interior design. For me, this is what this logo type and maybe the whole show actually represents. That things are changing, and it's terrifyingly exciting. Now if you wanted to recreate this design, all you really have to do is type out the title using Fontdiner.com as your base font, which you will find free for personal use if you look for it online. And then you play around with the sizes of the different words basically. A little baseline shift is also needed here and there if you want that 100% accurate letter placements. There are versions of the font which do actually include all these little sparkly bits as well. Although these are nothing more than basic shapes you would be perfectly capable of designing on your own, by merging a few elongated diamond shapes, and voila! Marvelous, isn't it? Okay, now for this next chapter we need to travel down from the Upper West Side to Greenwich Village. Let's talk about one of the key locations of some of the earlier episodes of the show, the Gaslight Café. Now the Gaslight is this low-key, underground entertainment venue, a bit of a rat hole in the show, where the marvelous Mrs Maisel performs stand-up for the very first time. What's more intriguing about this is the fact that the Gaslight is a real location. This was an actual bar which existed once and has been functioning from 1957 to up until its closure in 1971. It was a real bohemian-type coffee/bar which has changed hands and brands quite a lot as time went by. But just like in the show, one thing never really changed about the place. It was a haven for the outsider. If you wanted to see or hear something weird, wacky, barely legal, offbeat entertainment, this was the place to be. And as a performer, this was the kind of place you would go to test out your new experimental material. The beat poet Jack Kerouac or musicians Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix are none but a few of the legendary characters who performed in this little secret bar in their early days. Which is quite a lineup in my opinion. Now, in terms of branding and graphic design, a place like this obviously took the minimalist/brutalist approach. And of course, what I mean by that is the owner seemingly didn't give a flying fork about how they would come across in terms of branding and graphic design. I mean, come on. In these old photos you can spot a couple of different signage variations, mostly incorporating Old English, Gothic type fonts in and around the entrance, sometimes having a couple of different variations seemingly stacked in top of each other, which is not uncommon of the time, by the way. As film graphic designer Atkins explained in her book about designing graphic props for filmmaking, having a consistent brand identity across multiple mediums is actually quite a new idea. Before the computer age, the average business might have had a big iron gate signage which would have been designed by a blacksmith, let's just say. And this dear blacksmith was free to completely disregard the style the business was using for its printed materials, for example. Now I feel like I should state that Annie Atkins has nothing to do with the marvelous Mrs Maisel, as far as I'm concerned. But still, I try to mention her and her work as often as I can, because she's just the best in the field. And her book on film graphic design is by far the best book I have ever come across with on this subject. Anyway, moving on. The Café signage, which the show is utilizing in their version, is based on a classic Mexican Western style typeface, which I think can be perfectly recreated by the use of the font called Saloon Girl Feel. All you really have to do to recreate this logo type is write out the words Gaslight and Café in two separate type boxes on top of each other using the Saloon Girl font. Give it a pale dark purple color feel and include a thin black outline. Then what I would do is slightly bend them with the horizontal arc tool, which you can find in the warping effects. The word Café does need a bit more open tracking to space out the letters a little bit. There you go, peeps. Offbeat or what? Now for our last destination we need to travel from Manhattan way up to the Catskill Mountains, because I wanna get into the style of Steiner's summer resort. Steiner's is where the marvelous Mrs Maisel goes to spend her summer vacation with her family in season 2. And while the actual resort does not exist in real life, the idea is based on the very real fact that the Catskill Mountains summer resorts were a huge part of New York Jewish culture back in the day between the 1920s up until the 1970s really. Jewish families who could afford to could switch their New York-based jobs and lives to the idyllic mountain landscape for a month or two to spend their vacations in one of these mountain resorts, doing all sorts of fun activities with family and friends. And as charming as that sounds, the real reason why the Catskill Mountains were so often visited by Jewish families back in the day is a little bit more problematic. The Catskills, or as they used to call it, the Borch Belt, or the Jewish Alps, became a popular holiday destination for Jewish people as a result of anti-Semitism in 1920s and 1930s America. They came here and created their own little holiday spots, because, well, truth be told, they weren't really welcome anywhere else. Outside of this secluded area, other resorts, hotels, even certain airlines used to have a strictly no Jews policy at the time. Rather shocking, but you know what, where there is lemons, there's usually lemonade as well. So holidaying at the Catskills became quite a hip thing to do. And the area became rather iconic for the real Jewish comedians who were once here. Big names like Joan Rivers or Billy Crystal had their fair share of performing in front of these vacationers while summering in the Catskills in their early days of making people laugh. Now in the show we see our characters doing all sorts of eye-wateringly cliched, charmingly cheesy activities in this summer resort, like playing Simon Says or having a stargazing session, with commentary mind you, or being entertained by a theatrical show put on by the catering staff at the end of their vacation stays, just to mention a few of my favorites. Now of course, to reflect this old-timey goofy fun our characters are having, the setting had to match the vibe, so naturally the set and the interior design is very playful here. For me, this big painted welcome sign, which arriving guests are faced with as their first sight of their holiday, is the crown, the epitome of this whole silly summer fun vibe. Upon closer look, you'll see how this bold, fun, cartoony style is actually totally appropriate for the resort. Playful colors, bold shapes, and of course, our atomic design inspired elements are thrown into the mix as well. When you look at the typeface itself, the font is nothing unique. In fact, I have a strong suspicion that it is mostly based on this script font called Coffee Service. Why do I think it's Coffee Service? Well, because Coffee Service is a font which has been designed by Stuart Sandler. You remember him? Now, if you want to sit down and design something like this, follow my advice and combine Coffee Service with this other font called Letrista to get the closest match possible. It looks like some of the glyphs are handmade. You can have some fun with that as well, of course, if you want to. For the additional type, I used the block capital font called Bench Grinder, and I twisted, warped, and bended my way to this composition. As for the background shapes, apart from our characters on the far left, well, they are a combination of simple rectangle and ellipse shapes, as well as some good old-fashioned pen tool magic. Just color it up nice and bold, and you will get there. So how's that for marvelous content? Feel free to let me know if you enjoyed this kind of half design history, half nerding out type video, cause if you did, well, I would love to make more. Make sure you're following us so you don't miss out on any of that. All regular creative crew members know that this channel is not just about graphic design and illustration, but we also talk a lot about interior design, architecture, home decor, and everything else overlapping all these cool things. So if that's your jam, watch this space. Feel free to leave a like to help us reach even more people with this channel, and I hope to see you next time for some other cool creative stuff we could be talking about. Okay? Until then, see you guys!